crimes, and you take someone who commits a crime and says, oh, well, that represents all migrants. I mean, it's not the way to conduct this argument. I think we've conducted this argument on a higher level than that on the whole.
Welcome back, everyone. Good to have you here. So what we're looking at today is a debate that genuinely had me stopping and rewinding multiple times. You've got Polly Toynbee, a Guardian journalist, going head-to-head with Matt Goodwin and Constantine Kiosus on the topic of illegal immigration in Britain, and I promise you, this is not the dry back and forth you might expect. It gets tense, it gets personal, and there are moments where the crowd completely turns on the argument being made right in front of them. Stay with me all the way through because the second half of this clip is where everything really opens up, and you don't want to miss what Constantine brings to the table as someone who has actually lived this experience. Also, drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing where this community comes from, so don't be shy. Alright, let's get into it.
Abdulaziz took a car down to London and poured acid over a mother and two children.
It's quite low to use anecdote instead of figures. Of course there are stories. Do you think...
If they were your children, I don't think you would consider it an anecdote.
This mainstream media journalist just showed liberals are all about compassion until it comes to compassion for British people.
About asylum seekers, well, the thing is they're going to get, once they're here, 75% of them are going to be granted access anyway. So what are we doing locking them up in hotels at vast expense and unhappiness to them and to those all around who live in those areas? It's a very bad idea. Much better to let them get jobs straight away. And if that's an incentive, I don't think so.
Oh my gosh. You could literally see Matt Goodwin's disappointment immediately as soon as she said that. Because 3/4 of them are going to stay anyway, just let them come in and work with no vetting, no processing, just make everybody's life easier. Oh, Lord, please help us.
National Audit Office looked at, as well as looking at the cost of, they also looked at what the pull factors were and said, very, very few migrants on the way here have any idea about what the rules are about when they can work, if they can work, are there benefits, what can they draw, what rights do they have. They know nothing at all. So the idea that...
So she's genuinely making the argument that they're not incentivized by being housed at taxpayers' expense. They don't know why they're coming here. They're just jumping on boats from France, which is a safe country, to the UK, with no knowledge of what it's going to be like when they get here. Does that make any logical sense?
You know, fiddling around with certain kinds of punitive ways of treating them when they get here will somehow deter them, or indeed that Rwanda will, I think is just wrong. As for demonizing them, well, you know, that's not particularly helpful either. If you can either deal with them in some way, if you could find a way to send them all back or stop them coming here, fine, but nobody's managed to do that. If you can't do that, then you might as well treat them reasonably well, because they're going to be citizens, they're going to be parents, people who are citizens. They're going to stop being they are going to become us, the way wave after wave of immigrants have for many, many, many generations. They become an us, and then we forget that they were they.
So if we've not been able to deal with illegal immigration so far, then just give up and let them come and mix. And if you just come on a boat and stay here for long enough, no matter where you come from, no matter what your cultural values are, you can just become British, is basically the argument. This is a Guardian journalist, my friends.
Is illegal migration, because what you are setting out, Polly, is a recipe for disaster. What you are saying is that of the 114,000 people who entered Britain illegally over the last 5 years, and we've got maybe about 1 million people in the country illegally currently, is we should not only not provide any deterrent at all for other people to risk their lives by crossing the channel, but we should actually incentivize them to come
100%.
over by giving them jobs and giving them more support through the welfare state and so on. And I actually think that's deeply problematic for several reasons. You know, one is, I'll give you 2 words, Abdulaziz. Let's start there.
This is where it gets interesting, because Polly said something that the entire panel clearly wasn't ready for, and she said it without flinching. She said it's quite low to use anecdote instead of figures, and the room reacted like she'd said something outrageous. But here's what people don't realize. She's absolutely right on the intellectual standard. There's a reason we don't run courtrooms on feelings alone. There's a reason science uses data instead of individual stories. One case, no matter how horrifying, does not tell you the pattern. It tells you the exception, and the moment you build your entire policy framework around the exception, you've already lost the argument. You just haven't admitted it yet. And then Polly dropped the number that nobody wanted to engage with honestly. She said 75% of asylum seekers are going to be granted access anyway. You have to understand what that actually means. It means the system has already assessed these people. It means 3/4 of them have been looked at and determined to have legitimate grounds to be here. So the conversation shouldn't be if they stay. It should be how they integrate. That's the honest conversation. And then, and this is the part that genuinely stopped me, the National Audit Office, an independent government body with zero political agenda, looked specifically at pull factors. And their finding was that very, very few migrants on the way here have any idea about what the rules are. They don't know if they can work. They don't know what benefits exist. They don't know their rights. They know nothing. So the entire argument that we're being too generous and that's why people are coming, that argument has an official government report sitting on top of it saying the evidence does not support this. When Matt Goodwin called Polly's position a recipe for disaster, I want you to remember that moment, because he said it loudly, he said it confidently, but he didn't address a single word of that National Audit Office finding, not one word.
Abdel-Azidi was somebody who entered the country illegally. He applied for asylum twice, was rejected twice. He then committed a serious sexual assault. He then was convicted in the court and then applied for asylum for a third time and was this time accepted because a priest signed off on his application. Abdel-Azidi then took a car down to London and poured acid over a mother and 2 children, which, by the way, is why chemical attacks against women in Britain are now at the highest rate across Western democracies.
That Abdel-Azidi was baptized here, got asylum, and then did that. What a way to celebrate your baptism. I remember when I was baptized after I came to Christ, we just went home and had some food. My mum cooked us some food. There was no acid involved.
We have the highest rates of chemical attacks against women in this country in the West. You don't hear that very often, by the way, in The Guardian, but it's true.
Facts.
Why is that?
Facts. And why is it that the feminists on the left, the far left feminists as well, always seem to talk about violence against women and girls, at the same time advocating for open borders, advocating for undocumented males coming from who knows where, who've done God knows what, who think Lord knows what about women? Why do they not seem to have an issue with that? If it's only when it's English men that it's a problem?
Why is that? It's because we're actively incentivizing people to come into this country who do not share our values, who do not want to live according to our ways of life, and who do not respect British law. The security services have said this very openly. They are monitoring daily many of the people who are coming into this country illegally. We need to get serious. We should leave any convention, international convention or court that prevents us from strengthening and securing our own national borders.
Facts. 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 You cannot keep the people you love safe if you don't have control over who comes in and who comes out. Straight facts.
I think it's quite low to use anecdote instead of figures. Of course there are stories. Do you think...
You heard the crowd even respond. That was sickening how she responded. Sickening. Oh my.
Do you think there aren't stories about, all sorts of people who commit crimes?
Look at Aaron next to her as well. He's embarrassed. He's embarrassed to be on the same side as her right now.
Crimes, and you take someone who commits a crime and says, "Oh, well, that represents all migrants." I mean, it's not the way to conduct this argument. I think we've conducted this argument on a higher level than that, on the whole.
Wow.
Here's what I want you to pay attention to in this section, because this is where the emotional temperature of the debate completely takes over, and that matters. The Abdulaziz case is genuinely disturbing. Nobody is pretending otherwise. A person who was rejected for asylum twice, who committed a serious offense, who then somehow got approved on a third application, that is a real systems failure. That deserves serious scrutiny. The process failed. That is a legitimate conversation. But here's where it goes sideways. The moment that one case becomes the centerpiece of an argument about all asylum seekers, you've moved from policy into something else entirely. You have to understand the difference between fixing a broken process and using a broken process to condemn everyone who goes through it. Those are two completely different things. And then came the feminist argument. Why do left-leaning women advocate for open borders while also speaking about violence against women? On the surface, that sounds like a sharp point. But historically, the communities that have consistently pushed for stronger protections for women, better legal aid, better reporting systems, better support structures, those same communities have also advocated for humane immigration policy. Because both positions come from the same root belief that vulnerable people deserve protection. That's not a contradiction. That's consistency. And then Polly said something that I think was actually the bravest moment of this whole clip. She said, you take someone who commits a crime and say, oh, well, that represents all migrants. And that's not the way to conduct this argument. She said it calmly. She said it clearly. And the panel came after her hard for it. But she was factually correct. Generalizing criminal behavior from one individual onto an entire population of hundreds of thousands, that is not analysis. That is not policy. That is something else dressed up to look like both.
Did he say that represents every single person coming on the boats? Or is he not just making the point that because you don't know who's coming on the boats, you have no idea how many of them are going to conduct crime and do these horrible things when they come into the country? And the fact that the very first act they've committed is to break the law, you shouldn't trust that they're going to come with virtue and morals and integrate into British culture. That was sickening.
Constantine, do you want to come in and then we're going to have a break?
And a drink.
Well, I've been sitting very patiently, which is hard for me given how much nonsense has been spoken so far.
Facts.
So,
Facts.
first of all, if they were your children, I don't think you would consider it an anecdote. And yes, nobody would deny that British-born people also commit crime. Yes, that is something that we have to deal with. There is no reason why we should import foreign criminals.
100%. 100%.
Now,
Rhiannon White, yeah? Wayne Broadhurst, Govinda Johal, 3 people that this month, as I'm recording this, in October, lost their lives because they were unalived by illegal migrants. Now, to Polly, these are just anecdotes. But to those families, that's a mum, that's a brother, that's a father. And it's happening across our country. But when you're so wedded to an ideology, these aren't people made in the image of God. They're just unfortunate happenstances. But we need to be welcoming to, these migrants, these asylum seekers. Don't get angry or upset that we're not in control of who comes in when these things happen. This is the mainstream liberal perspective, and it's a perspective that is also permeated through our government that is going to lead to tensions to rise and rise and rise because people do not feel safe in our country.
as for all the other stuff, first of all, Aaron has tried to position this as a debate about conservatives and, more importantly, the Conservative Party. If this was a debate about the Conservative Party being useless, we'd all be on the same side. This is not a debate about the Conservative Party.
This final section is where the debate shifts completely, and Constantine Kiosus walking in changed the entire energy of the room. He said something immediately that I think a lot of people glossed over. He said it's hard for me to sit patiently given how much nonsense has been spoken so far, and the crowd applauded. Now, what's fascinating about that moment isn't just the line. It's WHO said it. Constantine is an immigrant himself. He has lived the experience being discussed. and his position is nuanced. He acknowledged directly that British-born people also commit crime. He said nobody would deny that. 100%. This is the part that blows my mind about this whole debate, because that acknowledgement that crime exists across all communities is the starting point for an honest conversation, not a starting point the conservative side seemed eager to reach. But then Constantine pivoted to the three names, Rhiannon White, Wayne Broadhurst, Govinda Jal, and he said to Polly, "These are just anecdotes to you, but to those families, that's a mom, that's a brother, that's a father. And look, that landed. That should land. Because the liberal position has never been that these losses don't matter. The liberal position is that you cannot craft effective policy purely on grief and anger, no matter how justified that grief is. History has shown us repeatedly what happens when societies build entire legal frameworks around fear of a specific group. It does not end well. It does not make anyone safer. It creates new problems while pretending to solve the old ones." And then Constantine said something that actually united the room. If this was a debate about the Conservative Party being useless, we'd all be on the same side. The crowd erupted, because that's the real conversation hiding underneath all of this. The party that had power for over a decade, the numbers happened under their watch. The votes happened under their watch. And now the same ideological space wants to act like the solution is simply more harshness, more punitive measures, more deterrence, when they already tried that and it didn't work. The liberal argument at its strongest in this clip wasn't about being soft, it was about being accurate. It was about using government data, using official findings, using logic, and not letting one horrifying story become the policy manual for an entire nation. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.